how safe can you truly be? What's safe is safe, really.
Yeah. And again, I've seen it over and over again. People think that they're safe, or government officials think they're safe, but it doesn't make any difference. Once that the masses get together and they just go for it, it doesn't matter how many police, how many army, how many people in uniform with guns and everything. It doesn't make any difference. When someone is more committed than the defenders, it's game over. I've seen it so many times now. Bottom line, I know that we're in this fourth stage of the cycle right now. That's where we are, and I know that. So do I need to look at some of the other cycles? Not really, because it won't make any difference for me to put my energy into it. But what will make a difference is looking into the different crisis periods, the different crises, and then looking at those overlaps and seeing how they're going to come together and what might happen as a result.
Check this out. Many people today struggle to manage their weight, but this is more true than ever after the age of 20, because after the age of 20, our body's metabolism slows down by as much as 4% every decade. By the time we're 50, we've experienced a 10% drop or more in our metabolism. That's a risk to health. That's why I highly recommend adaptwithketo.com. This product works by increasing the ketone levels inside your body, which in turn support boosted metabolism. A scoop a day, I saw improvements for my energy levels while working on the farm. And the best part is I never had to cut out carbs or make other changes to my diet. And if you want to try some of this amazing keto powder, luckily I've secured a deal for the Adapt 2030 audience. Take 51% off your next order by going to adaptwithketo.com or click on the link in the description box below. And now on with the video. Hey, and good afternoon, everyone. Today, Neil McCoy Ward. We're going to discuss things that are happening right now, how these problems might affect you directly, and then some solutions so you can protect yourselves, your families, and get ready for these changes that are coming in so swift, all encompassing, but it's going to happen in a blink of an eye. Because can you remember January 1st, 2022, Happy New Year, just a few months back? Well, these changes we're talking about are going to happen that quickly. Everything we talk about today, at least on my end, and the very first step into what I would consider a reset of our society, not in the Klaus Schwab way, but literally a reset based on disposable income, food pricing, energy prices. This affects everybody directly. What you eat, what your kids eat, what your family has access to in the supermarkets. We'll be here no later than the end of September, no first week of October. So if we trace that out, we're looking at about 5 months. So Neil, I appreciate you joining me today, and I'll put the links in the description box below. And as you were telling me, you had the 3-part series on the Great Depression on Neil McCoy Ward YouTube channel. Highly suggested there. And you were saying that, I'll even put words in your mouth. You were taking diaries from family libraries during that time and explaining. Now, I've been watching a lot of 1930s series of lifestyles also, and it's almost as if we could take out a single name and replace it with a modern name today, and we're living the almost identical chapter of history. And also following into World War I, again, it's the same thing. It's almost the same nations, the same players. You could replace a lot of what you consider today's leaders of those same nations, and we're looking at a script that was taken directly out of the entry into World War I. So there's many chapters here lining up. And Neil, I like your content anyway, and nobody better to talk to. So I'm going to leave it there. The floor is yours. And we discussed a little bit before what we wanted to cover. So I think it's just going to be an easy conversation with some solutions. So everybody kick back, enjoy. And then, we are going to discuss the problem first, but we're not going to go into fear, the doom, and the gloom. That's not what this is about. It's understanding the problem and be able to find some solutions. So Neil, thank you and welcome.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate that, David. Yeah, and you're actually right in what you're saying about the historical patterns, you know, one of the things I really focus on, and I guess it was more of a hobby for me, which is history. Just looking at history. Originally, it was military history. So I absolutely love military history. That's what it started as. But then it came into other parts of history, you know, studying lots of different cycles of history. And that's how, just like you were saying, I was able to see, hold on, what we're seeing today, we've seen this before. Actually, I could pinpoint 7 or 8 different times when that same pattern had taken place. And we're definitely in another cycle right now, whether you call that the fourth turning, which is Howe's models, whether you look at it from any of the models, there's so many of these different cyclical models. We're definitely there now. We are definitely in this crisis period. And the crisis period, really, if you look at a lot of the charts and you look at a lot of the forecasts from the 3-letter organizations, they tend to go from 2020 through to about 2030. Pretty much all of them. It doesn't matter whether you're looking at WEF or, you know, any of these sort of 3-letter organizations, they're all showing the same sort of forecast, 2020 to 2030, with 2025 being a sort of peak of the crisis period. So we've still got another, you know, 3 years before we get there. And one thing I was just saying to you offline was about some books. Actually, one of the things I always get asked about is books. So I've just grabbed a couple of books today that are on my desk here, and these are books that subscribers and my Patreon members send me all the time. You know, they just post me books and gifts and stuff like that. So this was a recent one I got. This is Our Mysterious Panics from Coleman. Fantastic book. This is easily over 100 years old. Another one by Claude Bowers, The Tragic Era. I think this one is early 1900s as well. Grapes of Wrath. I think most people have heard of this one, The Grapes of Wrath. And then this is a popular one that's doing the rounds at the moment, The Great Leveler. And there's one thing I'll pick up on with this book, which is not quite accurate. And it's basically called The Violence and the History of Inequality. And what this book is outlining is that every time we have inequality, which is what we have right now, social and maybe mainly financial inequality, where the rich are super wealthy now, so much to the point that it's insane how much they own. And the poor and middle class are sort of in that same category. And the one thing I'd say that's not quite accurate with this book is that there is one case in history of where wealth inequality didn't end in violence, and that was under Solon. So he was an Athenian, 630 to 560 BC, if my memory's correct there. And what he actually did was what some of the things we're seeing at the moment, which was he basically put these sort of very high taxes on the wealthy, the Athenian elite of the time. And he just taxed them so much that he did a wealth distribution, a form of socialism. He redistributed all that wealth, and it actually, well, they say, according to the history books, which we don't know how accurate they are, they get rewritten all the time, that sort of stopped this big violent revolution. But that's a great book. Great Wave is another one sent by a subscriber to me. Excellent book about revolution and the history. And then one of the thing I mentioned at the start, The Fourth Turning. So these are all really great reference books for patterns and cycles. And they're my sort of go-to books, really, with a little bit of this.
Yeah, you can start to see. Now, let me ask you, since you're an avid reader on the cycles of history, now the onset of the cycle, which is right now, there's a lot of things matching up with magnetic fields of our planet declining, which are allowing our jet streams and cloud cells to move to different locations, just unchecked. They're going wherever they like. Got the equatorial vortex, which is a new term a lot of people will start hearing as we get warmer weather moving north. And we're familiar with the Arctic vortex, where the cold air permeates further south down to Cuba if you're in the northern hemisphere. But these equatorial vortices are going to also be making the news this summer as our magnetic field has weakened even further, and the magnetic north has even transited further east and further south. So we're going to even get more perturbations or upsets and movements in what we consider a stable atmosphere. So the onset, let me ask you with the onset. Now, if we're coming into something that's been stable, such as planting and growing and harvesting dates for 150 years, I'll say that, and now it's completely out of sync. So in your opinion, coming into in the very beginning of the onset of a cycle, is that the most tumultuous time, or would it be the peak of the cycle, or would it be the exit out of the cycle? Which one do you think is going to be the most disruptive for our society and our current way of life and governance and economy?
Yeah, I think it's probably somewhere in the middle of that, actually. So whenever you come into these, and it, again, doesn't have to be about crops, it can be all sorts of things. Take China and the globalization breakdown, for example. What you saw, so we'll use that example because that's something that, you know, I focus on a lot more, is the economics and finance and, you know, trade and things like that. Now, you think what happened when all those lockdowns took place? We had a glut of inventory throughout Western nations, and it was just sat there doing nothing. And then we saw a bout of deflation in 2020 across airlines and, you know, hotels and vacations and all this sort of stuff. And a lot of goods that were just sat there, old inventory, summer beach shorts, for example, bikinis that were never going to be worn. So you saw all this stuff. So you saw a deflationary period there. But then what actually happened after that was we went into this inflationary period as we tried to get in a lot of goods and services from China. Of course, we saw the breakdown in supply chains and all the ships, and couldn't unload and couldn't load and all that sort of thing. So what we had was the same pool of money, which actually is not quite accurate because the pool increased. A lot of people misunderstand this around quantitative easing and the currency supply, where people say, well, the QE, which is the increase of money, putting more money in, it doesn't get into the economy. Well, that's not quite true, because if you think about stimulus and furlough and unemployment, that is from via government bonds, the central bank, and it gets pumped into the economy. That's what happens. It goes in, and then you see the velocity of money increase, and you see goods and services increasing because we have more currency units, let's say, instead of saying dollars or pounds or euros, chasing the same amount of goods and services. But what happened was you had more money, currency, chasing less amounts of goods and services. So what do we see? We see this sort of chaotic period where it's still going on now. You see it all the time, especially in America. People say, I ordered my car 6 months ago. I can't get my car. Or the secondhand, or, you know, the used car market exploding up with pricing there. Why? Well, you can't get new cars, but you're also seeing a lot of issues around getting spares and parts for those cars and semiconductors and, you know, the craziness around that. So you tend to see a crisis period when you first see the entry position, and that can be in sort of producers. That's what we saw it with the deflationary effects. And then the crisis sort of transitions to consumers, which is what we're seeing now. It's not the producers and the companies that are having issues at the moment. It's more the consumers that are getting destroyed by inflation, losing their wealth, really, or their life. Say, you know, imagine this, David. You have worked 50 years of your life. You've saved up all this money. Maybe it was a low-paying job. 50 years of your life, and then you're getting hit by 10 or 15, more likely, if you measure the CPI accurately, bouts of inflation. Your money's just getting absolutely wiped out in the bank. So this is how these sort of cycles tend to go. So it's a bit of, as you asked, it's the entry position and the exit position. You have this chaos all the way through.
I was reading an article over in the UK. They're looking at 5% of disposable income out of each family is going to be set up for home heating, at least coming into this season, which is, and I'm really wondering what's going to be the catalyst that sends people to the street. Is it going to be the food that they can't afford, the non-availability of the food, the home heating that gets too expensive where they have to choose to eat or heat? Or is it going to be the actual petrol that's not there, so they can't drive their cars, they can't go to work? But I mean, what does that ratio break in history when things become so overbearingly expensive that people can't even afford the dailies in life, and then they spill over onto the streets and want change. Now in America, that's going to take a very different form than it does in Europe or in the UK there.
Yeah, good question. And you're right in what you're saying. It's different for different parts of the world. So what are we seeing? I don't know if you've covered it much on your channel, but what are we seeing at the moment? Sri Lanka. That is a key one to look at the moment. And I won't go into all the background behind it, but they tried a different type of food program. They didn't want to use fertilizers and all this other stuff. But of course, you don't use fertilizers, your yield drops dramatically. And then they had to rely on imports, sovereign debt crisis. All these sort of things happen with Sri Lanka. But let's get to the point of what actually happened. The people peacefully protested. They said, we need food, we need this, we've got these issues. And it's the same cycle every time. The politicians don't do anything. They just say, who cares? Not affecting us. We've got our own business going on. We're doing whatever we're doing in the background. Until then, people start to get more and more angry. It's called tipping point theory. So they keep pushing, they keep pushing, they keep pushing. Nothing's happening. Okay, here we go. Let's tip over. And it goes into a period of not just protest, but riot. So you sort of see that flip from protest to riot. And then once it goes, it's just like a water hose. It went. So you saw in the last couple of weeks, just mobs pulling politicians out of kicking the doors in, pulling them out of their homes, stopping their cars, pulling them out of their cars, in the street, burning their homes down. And then the politicians react in a similar way. They say, shoot on sight. Any protester you see, anyone doing anything that they consider to be more extreme, shoot on sight, shoot. And now we've got a number of deaths. We have hundreds, if not 1,000 at this point, injuries. And this is the tipping point. Now, will we see the same sort of thing playing out in Europe and America? Yes, tipping point is the same thing no matter where you are, but it will just play out a little bit differently. In the West, we are wealthier purely by nature, by fluke, whatever you want to say. We have a lot more money. So we have a lot more disposable income, and we can use that disposable income to buy food. So yes, I actually agree with you with what you're saying about the food crisis that's on the way. But I think the developing nations are the ones that are going to get hit by famine, and it will be famine first, and it's going to be very, very severe. Whereas the Western nations, you're going to see food shortages, but you're going to see extremely high food inflation. And if you believe some of the war games from 2015, they're talking about 400% food inflation by 2025, which they've been pinpoint accurate for the last 7 years on every piece of that study. So that's worrying. So yeah, it's not sort of good times ahead. And I've actually printed off, because I thought you might ask me about wheat since I've been talking about it recently. I just printed off the main exporters of wheat right now and the main importers of wheat. And a lot of people were asking me over the last few weeks how I was able to forecast Sri Lanka and Peru and some of the other nations that are in social unrest right now. It's not that I'm, a magician. I have some sort of foresight. I just follow the food. The expression follow the money. I follow the food. So who imports wheat, for example? Well, China imports a lot. Egypt imports more than 10% of global wheat. So they're importing a huge amount of wheat. Indonesia, Turkey, Philippines, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nigeria, Algeria, all these places, they are major importers, not just of wheat, but other food commodities as well. And a lot of time people forget that just wheat alone, forget about corn and everything else, just wheat alone accounts for 20% of global calories. So people forget this. And I see a lot of comments where people say, I don't eat wheat anyway. I don't care. I only eat meat, or I only eat this. And the wheat is in everything. It's in feeds. It's in everything. So everyone will be affected by what's coming. And again, you can link it to a lot of things, but one of them is, as you were mentioning, changing weather patterns, but another one is the fertilizer. That fertilizer, and this is the problem when globalization breaks down, when you've got one country making most of the fertilizer and they just stop exporting it, you've got a big problem.
Yeah, a couple points there. Now, when you're looking also at who's importing the wheat, also look at the trade deficit based on food sales inbound and outbound both. Now, some of these countries like Indonesia, they could cover if they're going to export more palm oil out. But their new program for internal strategic palm oil reserves for cooking needs to be filled up. I think they're putting 2 million tons into that, and they're going to be exporting 7 million tons this year. But they have export revenue coming in from the palm oil sales. So they can offset some of that, or they could trade, and they could probably do a direct trade with different nations. Because the thing that was startling for me is Indonesia, they just cut off the taps in one single day, and then magically they turned it back on, and then they're having wheat imports because of that. So I think there was some, backroom deal where we'll give you some wheat if you give us the palm oil, make sure you don't turn it all off. But other nations like Sri Lanka, they don't have any option to really trade out or export. So I do you hit the very important point there. What happened with their agriculture, and how does that affect everybody that might be listening to this? Well, the fertilizers, if you're going to go with chemical fertilizers, they're short this year, so are herbicides and pesticides. But they went, Sri Lanka, to a full 100% organic farming lifestyle program with village co-ops producing the fertilizer to then give to the farmers in a regional basis. There were all these pilot projects that were producing their fertilizer for a very localized farm region, and the fertilizer organic was produced there right around where the farms that were using it. But notice what happened, their yields dropped 50%. So if we're going to bring it back to our own victory gardens again, our own home gardening again, it's great to do it organic. I'm a fan, but you're not going to get the yields that you would if you have just simple chemical fertilizers. And please remember, there's a ratio with that. So, currently it looks about 20% global fertilizer disruption at the moment. But then we add in Ukraine and Russia, and the news media is coming out saying clearly 20% reduction in wheat just from Russia and Ukraine. Now, they're not talking about the elephant in the room, which is the elephant in the room, the fertilizer and herbicide shortage. So it's a simple ratio on fertilizers. It's a 1-to-1 reduction. So your application in the fields, if you reduce 1%, you're going to lose 1% yield. So if you reduce 20% application, which a lot of farmers are going to do, you're going to lose 20% yields out of the fields. And then the herbicides at a 0.8, because there's a lot of different species of, it's not the target crop they're looking for. So if they're going to put out the fertilizer, they don't want to fertilize a bunch of plants that are going to uptake the fertilizer and steal from their target species. So they don't have the herbicides, and they can't remove the plants that they want out of there. Now you're looking at a 1.8 out of that if you're having fertilizer and herbicides. That's a huge reduction. And then they're already talking about 20% out of Ukraine and Russia. We need to talk more about the fertilizers, as you alluded to. Fertilizer and herbicide, I really think, are going to be the thing that takes it down. Forget this resource nationalism and this war. That's the distraction. The real thing you need to focus on is your fertilizers.
Can I just jump in with one point on that, David, actually?
Absolutely.
And that is, it is quite funny because I keep seeing these reports where politicians in different EU nations and America and Canada and all sorts of other places, and the question keeps coming in. It's the same question. What are we going to do about the fertilizer? The politician's either completely naive and doesn't understand the importance of it, even though the farmers' unions are explaining it in detail. They either don't read the reports or they don't care. But the second thing that they say, which is even more concerning, is they say, well, we'll just make our own fertilizer. Now, here's why that's baffling to me. If you think how they make a lot of the fertilizer, they use a lot of natural gas. So there's huge amounts of energy for fertilizer creation. What's happening in Europe right now, in the EU? Have you seen the natural gas prices? They are exploding. In fact, they are so high that this is going to, or it's caused already a cost of living crisis in the UK specifically and in Europe. So we can't get enough of this natural gas anyway. And yet we're now going to be taking the natural gas and making fertilizers, and everything's going to be fine. Well, no, because what happens if you are paying more for natural gas and then you are using it to create fertilizer? Well, there's a cost input there, which is going to be very high. It then gets passed on to the farmer. The farmer has to, he has to add that cost to the crop. And then what about the transport and everything else around the crop? He's got to actually get that crop. He's got to transport it. That's diesel. Diesel's through the roof. It's got to be there's all these things that are not being talked about, but they have to be talked about from a financial or an economics point of view. This is not going to be going away. These cost inputs that they're not even talking about yet, if they go towards creating their own fertilizer, are going to be enormous on the food supply.
Yeah, that is true. And, take that the next step. So fertilizer, if you're going to go and start home gardening, you're going to have to really think about building your own soils. And how do we as individuals create our own fertilizer outside the centralized delivery system and centralized production system? Well, you're going to have to start looking back into how to start leaf compost piles, or how to take garden clippings that are maybe from some company that will have to pay for disposable, that you can bring onto your own property and then start composting that, reusing the food waste that we throw away every day, or collecting food waste from around the neighborhood and have sort of a centralized, neighborhood composting pile where it can be done more efficiently, more hands at a larger scale. But these are the ways we need to start looking at it, building your soils back to produce your own foods. And that cycle of bringing up fertilizer from, let's say, leaf. I got 23 acres out here, part of it's forest. Well, if I were to save every leaf there and compress them and it would still take months, 6, 8, 10 months, even if I did it properly, to roll it over to give me the compost that I would need to then add to my plants to bring up higher yield. Now, you got to start thinking every time we're talking here about industrial problems or something on the globalization problems, we're going to have to bring that back down into our homes as well, because the time for you relying on centralized delivery to fulfill every life need that you have is quickly passing. We're going to be into an era no later than October where you're going to understand why your grandparents saved everything, why they still had all those old tools that you're like, why grandpa keep just throw those old tools away. You're going to understand that the quality of the steel and the tools is different. These things that we have to revert back to, we're going to step back a little bit to a more pioneering lifestyle. And it's a mental challenge too. I mean, what we talk about with the economy, that's one side of the mental thing of lack, or maybe you feel scared because you might not have the money to afford everything. But the mental clarity you're going to need to overcome to step into this world and embrace it instead of fearing it. That's something very, very different there. And Neil, one last thing, you're talking about the wheat, but corn is the king of everything. So if there's a 40% global corn reduction this year, how's that going to affect manufacturing? And do you think these companies will just stop manufacturing their products and we're going to suddenly see 80% of all boxes on the shelves in the supermarket dry up? Because literally any box, I'm not going to say 100%, but I would say above 80% of all boxes in every supermarket contain a corn-based derivative product, whether it's a corn starch, an emulsifier, high fructose corn syrup, or whatever it is. Will they just stop manufacturing, or will they try to change recipe midstream?
Yeah, good question. Well, I think that what they will do is they'll try to change recipe. However, it's not quite that simple when it comes to manufacturing, especially food, because your equipment, your machinery, your processes will be based on that product, that corn product. So it won't be simple. And I think the cost to do it would be extravagant for some of the major manufacturers and food processors. So what would they actually do then? They're probably already in the futures market. They would have that tied down. But what happens if, say, they can't get those deliveries? And it would be very, very interesting. I think we're just going to see somewhat of a reduction in products I think they're going to try and get as much in as they can. And what we've seen previously is companies just buying out entire farms, huge networks of farms, so that they can control it. If you think about someone like, in a different field here, but Starbucks and coffee, well, they own a lot of these farms, so they can control the fact that they can guarantee the coffee, although you can't guarantee any sort of crop these days with the weather and things. But yeah, it will be very, very interesting times. But maybe people will become more healthy if they haven't got a lot of this junk in their food, because some of it is not good. But yeah, it'll be an interesting one. We'll have to see how it goes.
And the change in diet too, that's another thing to consider. So far, at least in my life, and I'm sure yours too, I mean, every time I've walked into a supermarket, there's been foods and the foods that I want to choose. Now, lately, there's been far less fresh vegetables, but it doesn't bother me because we grow our own. We have a massive garden this year, and we're very close to the Amish, about a mile away from one of the Amish farms here. And I'm in the center of farming country. So everywhere you go, like on a weekend, there's people who put little stands out in front of their property out on the road there. And a lot of times it's just an honor system where, okay, take some cabbage away, or it's coming out of that cooler weather harvest. So there's broccolis and cabbage and this sort of thing available right now. Beets, that's real nice. But what's going to happen when people really can't get the fresh vegetables, or they don't have access to the meat? Are you able to switch from, let's say, rice as a staple? If you're going to have something on a side dish, you're able to move into sorghum or maybe buckwheat. I mean, these changes don't sound all that horrific if you're going to be changing what you eat, but in practice and practicality, again, just preparing food at home, there's a learning curve on how to, get harder grains to get softer to bring them up. Sorghum's going to take a fair bit longer to boil up than rice will. So, changes in food consumption as well to think on moving forward.
From my experience, when I was a soldier, 10 years, I've been to a lot of countries. I think I've racked up 72, 73 countries in my life. So I've been to a lot of places, and I've seen a lot of social unrest and breakdown. And I've, through bad luck, been right in the middle of something when there's been a major breakdown. It was actually in Nanyuki in Kenya. So I'll never forget it. I was in Nanyuki in Kenya, and there was some sort of an election issue, and I was right in the middle of town, and the whole thing just erupted, and it was absolute chaos. And yet the day before, these people were laughing and joking with one another. So I've seen how fast it turns. South Africa, more recently, was another one. That was not on the mainstream media, but I tell you, David, I won't even say some of the things that happened there. It was so horrific. Things just turn around really quickly. But you may have seen on some other social media how the malls had all been burned down and everything had been looted. And I mean, that was the very calm aspects of it, I would say. These things do turn around very quickly. And, there's the old expression about food and, how many meals you are away from carnage and everything around that. I personally don't think, just from my experiences, that the majority of people are prepared. And I don't think they're prepared physically by having the tools and the veg and the skills to grow, or having that storage, being prepared with their, even simple things like mylar bags, oxygen absorbers and grains. And I just don't think people are prepared. They rely on the mainstream media to educate and tell them, and the media just isn't telling them any of this. So the average person thinks, I don't need to prepare anything. Well, I can tell you for a fact what will happen if we do see food shortages, because we've seen it hundreds of times before. It's always the same pattern. All the civilized society, by day 3, some of them by day 2, but day 3, day 4, day 5 at the most, is out the window. And people will do anything they have to in order to get food for them, for their family. They will do anything. And I've seen it over and over again. Human beings are not, you hear this a lot, that we're now more refined and our generation is very intelligent and all this. It's not true. Human nature has not changed in a very long time. And I would argue, if you look at again, watch for all of your subscribers to watch that Great Depression series, that 3-part series, the people back then were so respectful. Tip your hat. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. That's how people were, very respectful to one another. And yet watch that diary series and you'll see what happened even in that society. It was not a good situation. So I think this is what's going to happen. I think everyone should be prepared for what's coming. However you think you should prepare as an individual, that's completely up to you and your family. But I would take some action for sure.
And if I could add a point about South Africa, because I watched as many videos as I could about what was happening down there, seeing that as a blueprint for what could happen, maybe not in every nation, but some. And one thing I noticed first is the storage facilities, like the U-Store, the self-storage, those were the first things looted. So if you're getting into the preparedness mindset and you say, well, I have a whole bunch of stuff, my house is full, we still have more things, I'm just going to get a storage shed because those things are protected, nobody's going to get in there, they're locked up. That was the very first thing that was hit, which was surprising. Then you can start thinking about caching things and whatnot, but storing it somewhere else outside your own protective zone there. And speaking of the protection, if you have a carload of SUV of armed guys coming up, that's a direct thing. You can confront that with your neighbors. But what the scariest thing is a family with starving kids knocking on your door. That confrontation there or that interaction is going to that'll scar you for life, because it's not like an armed intruder coming up. That's a direct threat. You know what's going to happen there. But an innocent family, my kids are harmed, we haven't eaten in 4 days, look at this, or, that's going to be a rough one to get through there. So you're not going to be able to feed everybody. And being as remote as I am, I still don't feel I'm remote enough. How remote is remote? And I'm living in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. You have to balance somewhere between what you can do for work, what your lifestyle is, what you're willing to give up, what you're willing to adapt to in terms of new lifestyles, meeting new people, starting new habits, etc. But think about the safety aspect of storing what you have, because South Africa was a huge, huge wake-up call. And Sri Lanka as well. Those were huge ringed in fenced areas in the government facilities and buildings and private politicians, plus they had their own security, and they still were just overrun in just minutes when you watch those crowds go through. So how safe can you truly be? What's safe is safe, really.
Yeah. And again, I've seen it over and over again. People think that they're safe, or government officials think they're safe, but it doesn't make any difference. Once that the masses get together and they just go for it, it doesn't matter how many police, how many army, how many people in uniform with guns and everything. It doesn't make any difference. When someone is more committed than the defenders, it's game over. I've seen it so many times now. And that is, again, tipping point theory. We always reach the tipping point in every one of these situations. Yeah.
So tipping point, maybe let me run a couple timelines by you, and I'm just going to see if you agree or disagree with this one. Now, I was picking up on those fertilizer shortages, at least 4 or 5 months ago when CF Industries first announced that there would be fertilizer shortages. And I started to dive into like fertilizerdaily.com and ag facts, and I follow all the ag news because I live out in a farming community. I go to the farm co-ops. Oh, by the way, for those of you in the States here, if you are looking to purchase bulk seed, you're going to want to go to the farmers co-ops. They're in every single county, and you're going to buy a 50-pound bag. Currently, we got some hard red winter wheat. It was $17 for a 50-pound bag, but last year it was $9. So you're looking at, and fertilizer, they're running out of the pre-mix like 10-10 or the 10-10-10 or the 6-12-12 or the 15s. I'm buying now the 4500, and just, you're going to have to start mixing your own, or 046. You're going to have to get your own ingredients and then start mixing those up. That's a new skill set, but all you need is a scale or a cup, and then 1 cup of this, 1 cup of that, 1 cup of that. Okay, that's your ratio. So the fertilizers coming in right now, we're not at the end of planting season in the Northern Hemisphere just yet. It will be coming up in another couple of weeks. We'll be at the very end of the planting season, and then farmers will get a good gauge of their intended planting, which the USDA uses as their forecast output and yield numbers at the end of the year, is based on what the farmers did for their intended planting. Well, that was done months ago, before the diesel shortages, before the repair parts shortages for farm machinery, before the fertilizer and the herbicide bottlenecks. That was way back then. So as we progress into now, there's been a lot of farmers who didn't plant what they were supposed to or intended to. Now, when we come into the farm tours, this is where it's going to start waking up the planet, when we really get into the end of July and August, when we get into the farm tours. And then September is the first delivery, at least what I would consider the good delivery here coming up for some of the ag products off the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. That's going to set the world alight. I would say a good 50% of the people will understand at the end of August what's happening. And by the time we get to October, when the full harvests are coming in, and that's all that's on the news is how much food was not grown, where the food shortages is, and they're pressing the fear button again in the media, then I think the rest of the plan is going to wake up. So that's kind of my timeline going out for the next 5 months. But how's society going to react to that is the thing. Once people get this information, are they truly, you've seen more about, conflict areas, the conflict's coming. Okay. Like, how do people really react? Does 100% of people go into motion? No way. So what's the percentages of, you think, people really getting ready once the whole world's aware of what's happening? How many are going to be spurred to action to actually really do something at that point?
Yeah, well, a lot of people, but it's a good point you mentioned, because I have a lot of friends who are police officers. They're more senior now because they've been in a long time, but they shared some interesting stories with me about the lockdown periods in 2020. Pretty gruesome, I would say, more stories, but that is that a lot of the older people, so you're talking people who were at home, or, they would go out to the store, they'd, get their milk and their bread and whatever, and they'd come home, that sort of thing. Well, they didn't have a lot of, that generation, they didn't have a lot of food at home and things like that. And also with the heating, a lot of them turned off their heating. This is quite common, David, in the UK. If a lot of Americans always surprised when I say this, but a lot of the older people, the British people, they actually turn off their heating to try and save money, right? So they do this. Now, this is actually expanded. It's exploded at the moment, where a lot of the older people and younger now families are turning off their heating to save money. It's called heat or eat. Do I heat my home or do I eat, basically? So some families are skipping meals, some are turning off heating. Well, actually what happened was, after the sort of lockdown periods ended, there were a lot of calls from neighbors. Oh, I haven't seen Eileen or Ethel or George in a long time. Knocked on the door, no one's answering. Well, when these police officers were going around and they were knocking on these doors and kicking the doors in, they were finding loads of these people who had died during the lockdowns for whatever reason it was, heating or whether it was food or whatever. Pretty horrific tales, all these things. So this builds again a pattern. You also had the people who were absolutely, I'm not getting locked down. I'm going to go to the store and I'm going to bang on that door and get them to give me some food. So you see these sort of extremes in every society. But then you have the other people, and these are the ones that what's known as early adopters. So what they do is they go out whenever there's any sort of indication of a lockdown or a crisis, and they strip the shelves bare. And we saw that with toilet paper, and we saw it with a lot of other foods. Now, here's the reason that I'm always baffled by it, because a lot of the group, they don't think clearly. So they'll go and they'll just buy all the fresh food, they'll fill their shopping thing with it, and then their cart or their trolley, and then they'll check out. But here's the problem with that. They're not thinking, okay, I need to think a few weeks in advance or months. They just think, I need to get this fresh food now, because that's what they're familiar with. They're familiar with fresh food because they haven't been educated on grains and long life food and how to prepare food and how to store it and how to use it sparingly and things like that. So I think that's the same pattern that we're going to see all over again. People are just going to go out, they're going to rush to the stores, they're going to strip the shelves. I actually did a very interesting video, and it was from March of 2020. And I went to the biggest supermarket in Europe. And I went around, and this thing is huge, enormous. And I went around and I was filming. There wasn't a single item on the shelves. The entire store, apart from there was some bottles of champagne and, a bag of salt or something, the entire store had been stripped bare. There was nothing. No fresh food, no fresh vegetables, no meat, no packets of anything. It was just all gone. So I think this is when we look at these patterns, and again, I share that story because every single person watching this can relate to that, because they went out, they saw the people that were panicking and buying up all the food. So now that we know that pattern, well, what do we do against it? Well, we prepare early, and we make sure that, again, going back to what I said before, that we understand food a little better, and grains and long life food and cooking, and we just make sure that we're prepared for it.
Fresh foods too, dehydrator.
Mm-hmm.
If you have the chance to get a dehydrator now, or get even extra trays for the dehydrator, or buy two in case one breaks, I could have taken that fresh food and I could have stored that up. I could have dehydrated. I could have turned, leafy greens into powders that I could then mix with water later. Mm. And the salt, I would take that in a second, and the vinegar too, because then you can start to ferment and do things like sauerkraut or pickles. And, salt and vinegar are going to be some of your most valuable things that you can have on site. And different types of vinegar too, the apple cider vinegar for digestion, et cetera. But then the white vinegars for being able to can. And you're going to need the jars with that, the lids, that sort of thing. But, thinking about food storage also, how do you keep rodents out of your grains? Because I tell you what, mice like wheat berries that you're going to grind into flour just as much as you like eating bread. Mm-hmm. And rodents are going to be something, look through history. How many times have grain yields been ruined by rodent infestation? Yeah. So many. So then bring it back on the home level. Well, do you have plastic tubs to store it in? Can you put some hot chili peppers around in your tubs so nothing wants to get in there? How do you seal that off? I've had hit or miss results with the pressurized, the things that are in the bag, the Eversaves or something like this, where you put it in and it sucks all the air out, and vacuum packers. Hit or miss, sometimes the meats will hold, sometimes they won't. So it's an experiment in progress. Like you mentioned, the oxygen absorbers when you want to put something up. And then how much of that you put up will really store, because we canned some stuff last time and we had not a whole bunch, but many of the lids didn't seal correctly. And I thought we had that thing long enough in the water bath for sure to be able to make those lids lock down. But they didn't. So, we lost several cans of that. And there's nothing you can do. You don't want to get botulism and get sick. So you just pour it out. And food storage, that's a huge, huge thing that not many people are thinking about. And I love the way you're thinking about the grains too, because not only can you sprout those for microgreens, example, wheat. If you know how to do any kind of microgreen sprouting, you can take those wheat berries and turn it into wheat grass. Mm-hmm. The health food store stuff where you go get a shot of wheat grass for like $18 or whatever it is now. That's superfood. And that's what you need to think about. How do you bring your stored food into something green matter in a superfood fashion that can also give you those micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, and the fats are going to be a big thing also to keep your brain functioning correctly. No fat, no thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. And I can relate, because when we were doing the oxygen absorbers, we found that one lot that we purchased, it didn't matter what we did, it just wouldn't seal. And we thought, is it the bag? Is it the seal? What is it? And we realized, oh no, they were all coming out of the same pack. So sometimes you might get a bad batch of them. Sometimes, we usually throw a lot more in than we need to, and then just check that it's sealed. And it's not just that as well. If you think about growing vegetables, growing crops, it's amazing how much of it you will lose to. See, we didn't know that we had a slug infestation here in our garden. We had no idea. So we have all this stuff all planted, everything's looking great. And then within a couple of days, it's all gone. We lost pretty much all of it to slugs. what has happened? And we found, oh, there were slugs everywhere. So we had to get all those out. But then you have other things coming in. You have, it is a learning curve for everyone watching. You've got to sort of start doing it hobby growing now, I would say, to cut out all of these mistakes, because when it comes to real thing, you're probably going to have to plant twice what you need in order to actually keep a lot of it. Aphids were another one that got our other plants, aphids. These are all things to look forward to, ladies and gents. Yeah,
we got guinea fowl for that very reason, because they'll get in there and eat the insects. Now, Neil, I've heard also to smother under your plants with sand, at least here in East Tennessee, that's how they do it, because there are a lot of things that are crawling on the ground that want to then go up the stem, and also putting in raised beds. But adding a layer of sand under your plants seems to work here. Now, I don't know if it's a one-all solution for everywhere, but anything that has sort of that mucus coating on the body, including caterpillars that might be down there, and sprinkle a little diatomaceous clay in with the sand, seems to be the winner. Because I know the old timers here, they don't plant pumpkin or anything unless it's in a sand bed around, because they don't want it. If it's really mission critical and you're going to starve if you don't grow that food, and you get a massive loss like that, then what? Because we've seen this through history where entire crops are wiped out, and you see regions completely empty out. They just put everything on the wagons. They're like, there's no food, we got to go elsewhere. And this whole population migration thing is another thing. I call it the fingerprints of the grand solar minimum. Like, if you go back to these epochs of history, and about every 400 years, you run into another one of these mass population migration events, collapse of the economy, where asset values they just don't hold. So there's no base anymore for an economy to function. And then the governments have to think of a different way to oversee and farm the people. And then it resets itself, of course, but you get these same three things that just reoccur with frequency and regularity going back in time. If you're going to grow your own food, moving through 2022, this whole awareness in October is going to freak people out. The markets might not be able to fill the contracts that are on the futures, commodities exchanges, because there's going to be a lack of corn of about 35% globally. The numbers, I'm not going to go any higher than that, but I'm conservative enough to say that I would anticipate a 35% reduction in global corn this year output. But then when people wake up, that's okay, their light bulb goes on, and wow, we need to grow some food. What happens when it comes into springtime next year, when the supply chains are not functional and there aren't enough farm implements, tools, seeds, that sort of thing, for just a home gardener to get it on and, move their production forward? Then we get into this next crisis, this next bottleneck. People understand the solution, what it is, but they can't implement the solution because the physical goods just aren't there. Then what really is, how do you even overcome that next step? Because you can see it playing out. Okay, this is step one. Then we go to step two.
Yeah, well, it's a good point. And that's why people should be buying the tools that they need now for the future. I mean, inflation is just going to keep going. It's not as if it's going to just go away. Something that's in motion tends to stay in motion. And when we're seeing more energy inputs, we're seeing more food inputs, it's going to keep pushing into inflation. The way to think about almost anything, tools or clothing or whatever you're thinking about, is everything starts and ends with energy. So it's the energy inputs that actually pushes up the pricing of a lot of things. Of course, there's a lot more variables to it, but I just want to oversimplify it so people can think in that way and always think about the energy. But what would happen? How would that play out? People can't get the tools. There would then be a pull on the supply chain. Whoever in whatever country would just ramp up production. And it's not even as simple as saying, well, in the United States or in the UK, local companies would ramp up production, because they probably haven't got the metal and some of the other things that they need, the sort of raw materials. They probably won't have that. They'll need to, again, create a pull on the chain to get those raw materials in. And again, a lot of the companies don't even manufacture the tools, even though they might have an American flag on, a British flag on. A lot of it is coming from elsewhere, or it's put together in the US or put together in the UK. So it will create this pull. We'll then see it ramping up in China or whatever country does it. But you're going to see a long lag, a long delay, where you just won't have the things you need available. But then later on, a lot further down the line, like the toilet roll, you're just going to see it all flood in, and then it's going to be piled high. But it does take time. It's not just a quick thing. It will take time. But in the interim, those tools and things that are available, again, supply and demand, when we think of the currency units and number of people, the price goes up on that equipment, on those tools.
What do you think the demand destruction price will be in terms of food and implements that you could get at your hardware stores? I mean, how high does it really get before people just pull back and go, whoa, it's far too expensive now. I can't afford that. Borderline hyperinflation, a 4x increase, but really, what do you think the demand destruction price percentage wise is?
Well, it's more a case of when we come, again, let's bring it back to supply and demand and tipping point theory. How much is the food versus how much are the tools and the seed and whatever else you're gonna use? So if the food is so high that it's almost unaffordable, but the tools and the seeds and other things are less, then people would flip to that. You've always got to think of it as these two sides, and where is that tipping point? That's what I always look to. For most of my forecasts, I use a few basic models. It will be Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which most people understand. And I often focus on the first two tiers of Maslow to understand not just how people move through the tiers to self-actualization, which is the pinnacle, but also looking at it from the reverse as to how do they focus and prioritize. It's one model. Supply and demand, tipping point theory. If you just look at these very simple models that anyone at home can understand, these are usually a good starting point when you want to try and figure something out and you want to try and make even a very basic forecast on what might happen. I would say those models will do, serve you well.
So let me pick your brain on when you visited these other countries in turmoil. Did the communities pull together to be able to work through these issues, or did they just stratify and it was everybody on their own, every man for themselves, every family for themselves, or did they organize into really tight-knit social structures that could move through what we're talking about in this last hour?
So it's a little bit of both, and it's a good question because I've never even thought about that. So as you were asking, I was thinking through it. And we could use, say, Afghanistan or Iraq or some other places as an example. Afghanistan, Pakistan, Kurdistan, all these sort of places, they're very tribal regions. So what you tend to have is a very strong community where people do band together, they do work together. But then you will have, say, and again, let's move out of those countries, but you will have the gangs. And the gangs are not part of the community. They are in it for themselves. They are in it to survive. And they will do whatever they need to do to get what they want. And the name of the game for most of those is violence and doing some nasty stuff in order to scare and intimidate so people just give up what they have. So that's why it's good that you mentioned community, because it is important to have that community to be able to band together, because that's where the protection is. It doesn't matter if you are an SAS or a Navy SEAL with, you've done every survival course and you've got all your different weapons and, you're an expert in martial arts and whatever. If you, and I say this to my wife sometimes as well, if let's say you had 5 or 6 guys that just rush the house in the middle of the night when you're asleep, it doesn't make any difference. You are just, that's where community comes in, and that's where, I don't want to go too much into the prepping here because it's not really a lot of, my sort of angle that I often talk about. I focus on economics, but yeah, you can set up all sorts of different things, radio networks, walkie-talkie networks, and all the other stuff that you've got that community in case there are in a scenario like that, which I've seen when you get these marauding groups, because if they come through, you don't really stand much of a chance. It's a bit like the military as well. Why do the military exercise troops. Why do they throw them into small conflicts? It's so that they get what's known as battle hardened. So you probably heard this in war game theory and some other things. You want troops that are battle hardened, because if you throw in troops that are super fit and super strong and they've got no experience, and they go up against someone who maybe isn't fit or strong, but they've got 5 years of experience, and 3 of those years have been, actually doing something, it doesn't make any difference how fit and strong those guys are. They're going to get absolutely destroyed. So this is another concept to think about.
And then that takes us on to, okay, obviously there's a breakdown in the economy at that point where you're talking about regional areas. What did you see tradables? Did you see people bartering, or what were the main barter items? Walk this out through. I know in the Western nations, it's going to be a little bit different, but obviously people function the same. They have the same hard wiring. I need this. I could trade you for that. Did you actually see that going on instead of using a cash basis for trade?
Well, you'll be surprised by this, but in almost every single country, it was US dollars. Yeah, I thought that might take you by surprise. It was US dollars. Didn't matter which country I was in, I always had US dollars. That is what people use. Now, you've got to think about, what if the US dollar in however many years in the future, it's strengthening at the moment. It's something called the DXY, and it's strengthening at the moment, which is quite a contrarian theory, because a lot of people thought it wouldn't and that it would weaken, but it's strengthening. But let's say that in the future, and it's inevitable, the US dollar will collapse. It's just, is it in a year? Is it in 5 years? Is it 50 years, 100 years? Who knows? But every fiat currency goes to zero. And in fact, this is a really good point, transition point, because I have here with me, I always have on my desk, currency from all sorts of different periods.
Oh, those are the Confederate Florida notes, huh?
They are Confederate. That's right. I also have colonial and revolutionary currency. Just be very careful with these. I have as well this, which was sent to me by a subscriber. That is the Reichsbank note from 1922, 10,000 marks. Now, just 1 year later, this is how fast it collapsed, we had 1 billion marks, which is actually 1 trillion marks in German, as someone corrected me on, because I thought it was 1 billion marks. It's actually 1 trillion marks. And then someone sent me, again, a subscriber made these as a joke. One was American, and this is $1 trillion, and this one is euros. So, yeah, it's interesting. And again, I have currency here. I always have currency with me. And this is euros and pounds and dollars and whatever else. But I keep it here as a reminder with this other notes, because it's not real money. It is just fiat currency. And it exists somewhat like a brand. So if you think of why one brand is more popular than another, yeah, some of it will be quality, but a lot of it will be how it exists in your mind. And people think of US dollars around the world as amazing and very valuable and things like that. Whereas if I showed them a gold coin versus US dollars or a silver coin like this, they're not interested. And I've done these social experiments. They are not interested. They want the paper. So it's interesting, but in the face of a complete breakdown, whenever that happens in the future, and I'm not really seeing it in, the immediate term, but I think in the future, yeah, you always see these cycles where you have a major breakdown. Look at the Dark Ages. 1348, we had the Black Plague, wiped out half of Europe's population. 1381 was the Serfs' Revolt. We go through these stages, these cycles in history all the time. It's just part of life. But then what do you always go back to? You go back to this stuff. People always go back to gold and silver. And that's why one of my largest holdings is in precious metals, because I know from 1970 stagflationary period, what is stagflation, let me just add for the viewers, is a period of high inflation, low economic growth, but high unemployment as well. So again, that was part of my 2020 forecast, that we'd see deflation 2020, high inflation 21, 22, and then stagflation 23 to 24, maybe beyond. So when you look at that, what actually performs best in a period of stagflation, it is gold, silver, and farmland. Those are the only three things that have been proven every single time to work in a period of stagflation: gold, silver, farmland.
Because you can produce the food to keep people alive. Now, you keep saying that we're seeing the same timelines going out to 2030. Excuse me. Well, what's the transition then at that point? Is it everything's run its course on the collapse phase, and then it's set to reset on a new asset class or new pillars of a new economy that are put in place: carbon trading credits, carbon allocation credits, gold, silver, crypto, digitization of forests and ecosystems? Or what is it, a magic 2030 date? It's not anywhere, you can't find it now. They always peg that 2030, 2031, and then we enter something new. Is it a cosmic cycle? Is it an energy cycle? Is it a shift in human perception? Or is it truly just, it's about the money and everything ran out of its final value and we have to start again?
Yeah, well, short answer, I have no idea. I don't know what will happen at 2030. But I do know by that point, we will be in some sort of a new cycle. And all the dates line up to that as well. It's the late 2020s through to about 2030. So we'll be in this new cycle. Now, that isn't what worries me. What worries me is the fourth turning part of the cycle before we go into the first section again. Because if you look at these fourth turnings, the final part, is always chaos. There is always military conflict and war. There's always some sort of famine. There is always mass amounts of death. That is what is a little more concerning to me. But as I mentioned to you offline, I have my plan for that. So I'm not really concerned for me or my family at all. Very, very that much concern. But I am concerned for everyone else. And that's why I try to, like yourself, David, try to educate everyone, try to just give this guidance and help. And you know it as well. A lot of people will listen and they'll say, this guy's crazy, he's a whatever, and he's nuts, and, you know, he talks garbage and he should be banned from YouTube. And, you know, you get all these wild comments. But that's all we can do really, is just educate people. People can take what they like, dump what they don't like. That's the way I see my role, really. And I was so committed to that. I left my previous job role, which was a very good role, in order to do my YouTube full time, so that I could, you know, really, really do this and help a lot of people with it. But yeah, getting back to the 2030 cycle, I don't know, but I know I hit upon something when I was one of the first people to do the Great Reset coverage. And I made that video. It was instantly banned. My channel was blacklisted. I was attacked by all the mainstream media outlets. The BBC did a feature on me. I mean, you don't do that. I mean, this is just PR 101. You don't do that unless something has been exposed that you don't want coming out. So I thought about what I talked about there. And I realized it was the latter part of the video, where I talked about the central bank digital currency and how this was going to come about. And at that point, no one was talking about CBDCs. It was a conspiracy theory. There was no such thing. It was never going to happen. But when I did that and I touched upon it, and it was all about climate change, that's how they phrased it all, that the whole thing was about climate change. So I did this investigation and I found out every single one of these organizations is a bank or financial institution that's committed to climate change and all this stuff. And I went, it doesn't make any sense. Why would they care? A company is a for-profit organization. They don't care about the climate. They care about their shareholders and profit. That's it. They don't care about anything else. So I knew there was something fishy. And it all ties in again with this same timeline towards 2030, with the carbon credits, with the carbon net zero, ESG, environmental, social governance, and with a central bank digital currency. And with, again, these three-letter organizations, I think we're going to move towards somewhat of a central bank of central banks. Now, we already have that. We have the BIS, Bank of International Settlements. But I think there's going to be something similar to that, or the IMF or something, who are just going to take control. And I don't know what that could look like. An extreme view I could throw out there was you could see a one world currency, a digital currency, the one coin to rule them all, like the Lord of the Rings. It could be something like that. I don't know. These are just theories I have, but we'll see as time goes by how these play out.
It does seem when you're sort of over the target or there's a message that's being released too early, they hit you. But now if you look, central bank digital currencies, no problem. You can talk about crypto and CBDCs all day long. Great reset. Oh, just let's review the book online here. Nobody cares anymore. But when you're the first mover on that information, when it's a little too early to let it go out public, because it seems like this information release is also on a schedule for a certain effect in the society, problem, reaction, solution, that if you spill the beans a little too early, they have to rein back your message so not enough people or not a lot of people see it. So let me ask you about, you see cycles, I see cycles. So how many cycles do you think are intertwining at this moment that we're entering into here? Because for me, I got the grand solar minimum cycle. We got the 11-year solar cycle. We got the 400-year turning in addition to the fourth turning. So there's, a couple, 4 or 5 that I see in earnest that are here. I'm not willing to go back and say we're entering a 12,500-year younger Dryas impact thing or a magnetic field reversal at 42,000 years. Not willing to go on that deep of a cycle intertwine, but we do see a fair few overlapping right now.
Yeah, and you're right. See, I look at it in the same way you do, but I look at it more on a granular level. So I look at it in terms of crises, and I look at the convergence of crises. And that's what I tend to focus on, as opposed to the bigger overall cycles. Because bottom line, I know that we're in this fourth stage of the cycle right now. That's where we are, and I know that. So do I need to look at some of the other cycles? Not really, because it won't make any difference for me to put my energy into it. But what will make a difference is looking into the different crisis periods, the different crises, and then looking at those overlaps and seeing how they're going to come together and what might happen as a result. Now, I remember when I covered Russia and what would happen when all these crises converge with Russia. And that was a very, very interesting video, a very popular video as well, because it did foretell a lot of the things that I hadn't even thought about. And they sort of came together during the video, which was very, very interesting pattern. So yeah, there's a lot of things coming together all at the same time. Food, energy, inflation, monetary. So we've got this major financial issue where things are going to collapse. And again, let's go back to my 2020, 2021 forecast. NASDAQ to go first, cryptocurrency to go second, the greater stock markets to go third, where we'd see a decline, bear market. Then we might see, and I'm not 100% sure, but we might see a sort of run up later on once they see, okay, this is not working, raising interest rates, it's not working, it's in a bear market, it's going down. Let's do one last blast and let's see if we can pump it up. We might see that, I don't know. Or we could just see it run down and just keep running down. What goes after that? Well, if they keep raising interest rates, the base rate, you're going to see the housing market come down. So that is really the way I see it. It's a 4-stage approach. And again, I won't get too technical on it all, but it all involves liquidity and credit. So most people think of money as money, but it's not. It's currency, and more than 95% of all of that currency is debt. This is why I say to people, don't leave all your money in the bank if they make mortgages and loans and credit cards. And because when everything starts collapsing down, it's known as the great deleveraging, happens every couple hundred of years. It's why people don't talk about it, because it's not a known concept. But in the great deleveraging, all of the debt collapses upon itself. It just gets written off. And it also links in with some periods of hyperinflation. So you just see everything collapsing upon itself. You go to the bank for your money. Sorry, we lent it out on a mortgage and that mortgage collapsed. Sorry, we lent it to that business collapsed. It's no longer there.
You could look at it another way. It's the greatest opportunity in human history because we can see these cycles converging. We have more interconnectivity. You can see the cycles play out, and then you could take advantage of that. So do you think crypto might rebound after this, or is it all gone into the muck and we just know there's going to be a few surviving coins and that's it?
Yeah, so I own crypto. So full disclosure, I own crypto.
Yeah, so do I.
Yeah.
Full disclosure too.
Yeah, and I mainly focus on big projects. Or what I do is I apply the same methodology to crypto as I do to the stock market. So certain projects I hold is because I've done fundamental analysis on those projects. So what do they solve in the real world? Is it just a meme coin? I don't touch those, even though, yeah, okay, I'm sure I could have made loads of money on Doge and things like that. I don't touch them because they don't solve a real world problem. So what I focus on is crypto that solve real world problems. And I think they're going to have a big impact in the future. But I only go for large market cap and things like that. I don't speculate on things.
Because you mentioned crypto diving down, that being the next shoe to drop, if you will. And a lot of people are going to, no, it's not coming back. But, I don't know. I'm just trying to get a little more insight. Obviously it's going to rip down a little bit further, even I do believe. But then, will there be a rebound? And when might be the question. Well, I think everything might move in tandem. Then if they all hit the bottom and as you're staying in a step down fashion, then they might start coming back up again in that same step up fashion.
Yeah, well, it's hard to know because you've got too many variables. And again, a lot of people say they know and they're an expert on it, but I could tell you some stories about experts that I've mentored who are in crypto and they don't know. I can tell you that. So here's a couple of ways it could play out. We keep going lower, but there's always a support level. In any asset, there's always a support level, and there's always a hardcore as well of people who just will not sell no matter what price it goes down to. So you're always going to have a support level, especially in Bitcoin. Oh, we use the keyword on the video. So you're always going to see
safe
that.
Now. We can talk about that. That's approved language now.
But yeah, with the crypto angle, you're going to see a support. And then here's what one or two things will happen. 90% of the projects will die. They'll just go to the dirt and disappear. And then new, or the latest new projects will come along and they'll grow again. So that's one aspect of it. But how long will that take? It could take years. It could be in this bear market for years and just sit there. Another theory is that what if people start worrying and panicking? Oh, we're losing all of our money, and it's a middle to younger generation. Well, they might see some crypto projects as a safe haven. I don't know. I'm not sure because I don't know the psychology of what people will do in this new environment because we've never had this as an asset class before. If you can even call it an asset class, some people will, some people won't. We'll always get disagreement on that. So that's one way you could see it go. We could also see it getting so highly regulated that people just, you could lose some of the support levels in it because some people are just like, you know what, it's not worth it anymore. How did the Romans achieve some of the things they achieved? They put such high taxes on it to the point where some farmland was 90% tax. That the people walk away from their farms. It's not worth it. Give up the land, let it go fallow. So you could see, again, it's the same principles and concepts throughout history over and over and over again. So you could see something like this occur with crypto as well. There's so many different things. The bottom line for me is I don't really care what happens because I only put in money into speculative things like crypto, for example, that I can afford to lose. If it went to zero, it wouldn't affect my life in any way. It's just, that's That's not good. Lost a bit of money there, but that's the way I see it. Some of these things, I don't necessarily see it as this is a big long-term investment for me. Right now, where I see my investment, precious metals and farmland, that's what I see as investments.
An important part here as we sign off today, keeping a little bit of precious metals so you can exchange that into whatever the value might be if it's hyperinflating, to be able to pay your property tax. Because in the States here, that's one way that they were getting away with theft, legal theft of a lot of farmland and property, was the non-payment of property taxes during the Great Depression. People could not pay, so the banks would foreclose. And then they had something called the penny sale, where the whole community would turn up, and the bankers, if somebody else were to bid in, they got taken off and beaten off to the left over there to a pulp. And the farmer would usually try to buy their land back for pennies on the dollar at that point. But that was a rare occasion that it really worked that smoothly. Most times people had lost their land simply for, at that time, a few dollars of non-payment of property tax. So to be able to hold even a silver coin that might get you through on the exchange rate in a hyperinflationary environment, to be able to pay your property taxes and then keep your land. But Neil, thanks for coming on. What do you think about that idea? Because precious metals, I'm a fan. It's been like that for 6,000, 7,000 years. It hasn't failed us yet. Every fiat currency has collapsed, and we don't know about crypto just yet. But the land is still here. The earth is still spinning. And I know that farmland will be here too.
Yeah.
And the ability to grow food and feed people, that's going to be a big one. So any last thoughts for us?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The way I'm telling, again, my community at the moment, and we've been pretty good throughout the last couple of years. We have done well. We did well on silver. See, silver's my thing, David. I'm very good at analyzing silver and predicting it. It was around, again, that period, I think it was March or April, when I saw the gold to silver ratio go up to 100, and I saw it go through the roof. I saw it go to 115, and I just went pretty much all in on silver at that point, because I knew just from knowing the charts that silver had to go up at least 50%. But then when it went to 125, I'd already put all my money in, so I couldn't get a better rate, but went to 125 to 1 ratio. And then silver followed shortly after. It went up 100%. So I do agree with you that there are patterns. You can see the patterns through all these things. But yeah, tangible assets, my friends, that's what you need during periods like this. It is tangible assets. If it's digital, or if it's in the bank, or it's some tech stocks and growth stocks and stuff like this, and bonds and all these other things, I would say you may have a difficulty in the future. If we see a great deleveraging pattern like we mentioned, you might have a bit of difficulty getting access to these digital, because that's what they are. They are digital ownership rights of what we could say tangible assets, but they are really digital assets that you own right now, even if they do represent physical tangible assets. So yeah, anything physical, anything tangible, these have always done well in periods of uncertainty, and they'll always do well in the future, in my opinion.
I wish I had a time machine so I could jump into the future and see how they wrote about this period, even though we lived through it. I'm wondering what they would say and how it'll play out, and if they get the truth, because the victory, or truth is written by the victors. So wonder how much of the past is really going to repeat, or what we really know about the past. But that's a subject for a different time, and I'd be way off on a tangent on that. So anyway, hopefully everybody got something that you can use to take forward, especially this weekend. We're coming up to the weekend, so think about what you can plant, what you can get ready for your garden, what seeds you could buy. Think into next year's planting. It might not be so incredibly important right this second, although if you do see the future, you would know that it is. You need to practice this year. Make your mistakes now when it's not really that critical for you and your families. But then, plan for next planting season and get out in the stores, see what's there. Talk to a couple people, learn a little more about taking food growing into your own, decentralization is your own home garden. And I'll leave it there. But Neil, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, you're most welcome, David. And for everyone watching, thanks for watching. Really appreciate you. I'm sure David appreciates you as subscribers. And feel free to come over, check out the Great Depression diaries that I did. You will love those videos. It was so much work, and you'll see the amount of work that went into it just when you see the diary. So, all right, take care.
Thanks. And I'll put those links in the description box below, so you can go over to Neil McCoy Ward's YouTube channel and click on that. That way you don't have to search for it in the description or the videos or the playlist. I'll just link it below, click and go. And anyway, thanks for your time, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.